Thank you everyone for joining us today. The subject of this panel has actually changed. We're now just discussing Avengers Endgame spoilers. So if you haven't seen Endgame, now's a good time. So my name is Nick. I'm the founder of Mainstream Media. We're a live stream production company based in Chicago and Washington, DC. And it's pretty wild to think about the fact that it was only 5.5 years ago that YouTube enabled live streaming on their platform. It's only been around for about 5.5 years. Facebook followed suit about 4 years ago. So even though the concept of streaming has been around for a while, people have been doing it in various ways for 20, 25 years, we're kind of in this new era of social streaming, and content is just exploding. My role is normally as a producer of live streams. And so my role, what I do is work with clients to translate their vision into a series of actionable steps, tasks, milestones, timelines, and budgets to help them achieve their goals, right? Easier said than done, I guess. The folks who are really important, though, are these superheroes on the panel today. And these are the ones who are actually making the content, who are really creating that content and achieving that vision, helping our clients achieve those goals. So what I'm going to do is just have everyone introduce themselves very briefly, and then because we are work in a visual medium, everyone has submitted a very nice photo. So we'll talk a little bit about who we are, what we do, why it's important, and what's in the photo. And we'll start with Vic.
Hey, I'm Victor Cerejo. I'm a technical producer for Sweet Spot. We are a full-service video production company based here in New York, LA, and San Francisco. And do you want me to talk about the photo now, or?
Why don't you tell us a little bit about what you do?
Okay. So as a technical producer, I do a lot of the scoping and just getting together the technical workflows and technical teams needed to execute projects. And then, like most live streaming productions, I wear a lot of hats. So oftentimes I will be either directing a show or TDing a show or encoding and handling the streaming for outbound transmission.
Cool. What's in your photo?
This is actually me directing Nintendo at E3. And it's probably one of my favorite ones because I'm smiling, so I'm probably having a good time. And I'm a gamer, so this is kind of a lot of fun for my crew and the people involved. And Nintendo is just a great client to have, and it's just an awesome event.
Cool. Right on. Thanks, Vic. Liz, why don't we go with you?
Sure. My name is Liz Hart. I'm a freelancer that works with teams in various capacities in broadcast truck roles, mainly as a producer or as an AD, assistant director, which is the role that I'm here representing today. I mainly work where live events meet broadcasting and live stream specials or special coverage. So things like the Democratic National Convention, a studio that they might have that is doing maybe a nightly live stream or coverage before and after plenaries, world summits. This here is New Year's Eve in Times Square. I've been either a producer or an AD for the past 7 years of the official live stream with my friends at LiveX. And in this photo, I'm in the AD seat. Aubrey, who's actually in the back of this room right now, is in the middle as our director. This was a wonderful LiveX experience. It's a 6-hour broadcast that is just live coverage of performances in the square, things behind the scenes. And this, I think most importantly, is the first all-female front bench and majority female broadcast truck on this show in, I think, 10 years that the live stream has been around. But major live events and conferences and helping various teams accomplish their goals through and around the truck or village.
Right on. Thanks, Liz. And Nick, what about you?
All right, so I'm Nick Nagurka. I am a senior audio engineer and tech manager at LiveX. Today I'm representing the role of an audio engineer in live streaming and broadcast production. What I do is I sit in this middle realm where I'm working in technical management and also audio. So I come at that from sort of an audio standpoint, but it translates pretty well to working and planning events. So what I do is, a lot of the time, is a technical producer will work on defining our workflow for a job, building out how we want to meet the client's needs, and then at some point I get brought into the process and I'm able to look at the workflow, figure out how we're going to do that, boots on the ground. We talk a lot about how we're going to handle intercom, how we're going to handle audio, how we're going to ingest audio, if there are any third-party vendors who we need to interface with, and that sort of thing. And in this photo is the LiveX mobile unit, which we designed and built this fall, and used it for its maiden voyage on New Year's Eve in Times Square.
That's a heavy show to have as the maiden voyage.
Oh yeah.
Right on. So the way we're going to kind of have this conversation today is we're going to go from end to end in terms of production. I think it's kind of a common misconception that when you're hiring, an audio engineer, a TD, or an AD, that they come in the day of the event and they're day players. But really, all of your work starts way before a show, before you're on set. So let's start with pre-production. Before a live stream happens, what are you doing to ensure its success? Vic, let's start with you.
Yeah, from a technical standpoint, you got to start at the beginning with being transparent as possible with the client and the project and expressing exactly what the technical team and the technical needs are. If you hold anything to your chest and you have surprises or last minute requests, or if your client or your venue is like, how much internet do you need? Being as transparent and upfront and clearly just explaining the steps along the way really kind of helps keep everyone on the same page from production, from the technical side, and just having a flawless communication.
Right on. So like what kind of questions are you asking like when you're first starting an event?
Yeah, so the biggest one obviously is internet at your venue, and what that looks like. Is that being brought in outside? You have to bring in your own cellular or some sort of third-party solution. And then the second is just scoping the project in terms of how many outbounds, what are you trying to hit stream-wise, how long is the stream, and kind of stuff like that.
Cool. Right on. Nick, what about you? What are you doing before a live stream to ensure it's going to be successful?
So I'm going to look heavily at the technical workflow document that we've built, and we're going to plan out exactly what devices we might need, how we could ever possibly improve that workflow, if there are any significant fail points that we need to address, and how we are going to address those with backups. Mm-hmm. And then we're also looking to decide how we're going to handle ingesting audio, whether that be, are we the provider of all audio for the event, or are we taking feeds, and how are we going to take those feeds? Are we going to take them over analog multi-core, over like MADI or fiber or some sort of other digital transport? Are we going to be taking splits if we're doing music, or will the host provider of that audio allow us to take splits? Do they want us to take, say, stems from, especially in music, people are very protective of how they want their music to sound. And then we're going to look at, how long our cable runs are, if we need to go fiber or not.
Right on.
Sort of thing.
Yeah, and you mentioned protection in music, and I think that when you're talking about like social streaming, this kind of comes up not just in terms of making sure the fidelity is there, but also in terms of like rights management.
Absolutely. Right? We've had shows where you'll have interstitials in the middle with, say, a DJ set, and you're doing music performances all night and you have a DJ set, and we need a mix minus without the DJ so that we don't get our stream taken down. YouTube may flag those streams and not take you down, but it's a risk that you don't want your client staff to take.
For sure. Liz, what about you? What are you kind of doing before a show starts to make sure it's going to be successful?
So in the AD role, we are assessing everything we have in our tool belt. So that is every asset that we have, things like packages that we know we need to play, deliverables from any sponsors, or pieces of talent that we know that we absolutely have to capture. And we are working through workflows, making sure that people who we need to be calling cues to, who need to be responding to us and communicating with us, have all of the efficiencies possible that they need to be able to do that as fast as humanly possible. So when we go live, two things. One, know everything that we have to do, and we know all of the nuances about that. If it's a package or a piece of video, we know how much top or tail there might be, so we don't trip ourselves up because we've already previewed these, we've made notes, and we know what that is. And also when we have uncontrollable pieces, so working with talent, calling to people live in all of the different seats in the truck, we already know what it is that's going to break down all of possible obstacles that might be between making those very fast calls back and forth with them. So by the time we're going, we can only focus on what we need to do to fix. So it's kind of like a funnel where we are taking all the unknowns and trying to get as much certainty as possible out of the rehearsal stages. So by the time we're live, we have the bandwidth to do really nothing but prioritize troubleshooting. So whether it's assets or people in workflow, we're focusing on those two things.
Right on. And when you're doing a show as complex as the New Year's Eve show, when does pre-production start for you?
The interesting thing about New Year's Eve in Times Square is that we don't get rehearsal time until a very short window prior to. You can't take over Times Square weeks in advance, though we would love to do that. The rehearsals with talent are really critical for us because we have such a short window to work out all the kinks and figure out what makes humans do their best work. Or who in the truck do we have together? Potentially, as you know, trucks change. We might have that synthesis of people or that grouping of people for potentially the first time together. And finding out this director calls things in this way, or this person who's doing our playback responds faster or uses this language. Because the AD is the navigator for those things, it's almost being a translator and adapting to what those people need first and most to be able to do whatever it is that they need to do fastest. So some people are more focused on making sure that everybody has nomenclature that is the same. I also prioritize who needs what and how, and I try to make it, to me sometimes it's more adaptable. I'm able to be more adaptable than changing a whole truck. So it's weighing those kinds of things and figuring out what it is that's going to work with that very special truck.
Cool, right on. I want to talk about some of the considerations that are specific to live streaming as opposed to like traditional event production or broadcast. Vic, what's your experience there? Is there anything that you're doing special for a live stream as compared to other kinds of production?
Yeah, the biggest one for live streaming especially is, I think, platform compliance. When you're streaming and you're hitting so many different platforms, and each one of those platforms, and your YouTubes and your Twitches and your Twitters, they're always changing what they want from a stream side. So one day your signal will be great, and then the next day you have people telling you it's bad, what's wrong, what are you sending here? And oftentimes they don't tell you that they're changing things. Twitter doesn't send out an email saying, hey, we don't want 1080, we want 720 now. And so you kind of just have to be super on top of those things, and that's that's like a big thing with live streaming that I don't think a lot of people do in broadcast. And the second thing for me with live streaming is traditional broadcast comes with its own history and trade and background experiences. And I feel like with live streaming, especially when you're booking technical freelancers or even just general crew, there's a really mixed bag of backgrounds and experiences that come to the table with live streaming. Some folks are from traditional filmmaking, some folks are from IT, and they parlayed into video streaming and video production. And I think that it's both a pro and a con because people bring a lot of different things to the table. Yeah. And just working through that with individuals on live streams is just part of the game.
Yeah, sure. I mean, it can be a great thing to have different minds, different skill sets involved in a live stream production. But it kind of gets back to what Liz was saying about nomenclature, making sure that everyone's speaking the same language the entire time, right? Cool. Nick, what about you from a live streaming perspective? Is there anything you're doing differently?
Mm-hmm. For live streaming, we find that your endpoints, the devices that people are going to be viewing your content on our typically mobile phones or laptops, and setting your audio levels to traditional broadcast standards doesn't quite cut it for those devices. So broadcast standard would be negative 24 LKFS or loudness units. And that's fine on your TV, sounds great. But on a mobile phone, it's a bit quiet, and you're turning your volume all the way up. So we find that we're mixing to around negative 18 LKFS with a higher true peak maximum, but you still need to give yourself enough room for the encoder, because the encoder is going to, some encoders will clip earlier than full-scale digital, especially on Facebook. So we're giving ourselves a little bit, still a fair amount of headroom on top, but a higher average level overall. It's about 8 dB hotter than what would be broadcast standard.
Gotcha.
And we find that's kind of the sweet spot for phones to be like nice and hefty and loud, laptops to sound good, but you're not totally crushing the signal.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool. Yeah. So it's got to be louder because everybody's phone has a different speaker, and it's probably a lot crappier than.
Yeah, it's
whatever
not an
you're watching
ideal
on TV.
medium, but we find that if it sounds good going out, it should sound good on a phone.
In theory.
Yeah.
Right on. Liz, what about you?
So live streaming has the blessing and the curse of often being a second or a complementary screen. So if there is a larger show going on, we are not only complementing with programming, we are also enhancing an experience that people are often watching on television. For example, we did Thanksgiving Live with the Food Network as a second screen. When people are done watching a segment on television, and they want more content, that is where they're turning to second screen sometimes. So making sure that that content is more of what it is that they love, is not a repeat of what they just saw, and is also another angle of that is really interesting. It also plays huge into the role of the AD in terms of sequencing. What did they just see? What makes sense after that? What are we going to segue back into when we go back to the show? Similar for live events, before and after plenaries, or some teasers that go into really large keynotes is where we're seeing live stream used a lot. So what is it that is going to enhance, not detract, but also give something really special to a viewer experience that is part of something bigger than us, and really for the better. It's a more holistic and richer experience because of live streaming. Yeah.
Yeah. Right on. Very cool. We all know that, like, when you get those gigs where you only have a couple days to figure it out, things are more likely to break, right? They're more likely to go wrong. So what is something that y'all have solved in pre-production? Or what's a challenge that you regularly try to solve in pre-production when you have that kind of extra time? Liz, why don't we start with you?
For New Year's, we actually were screening some clips this year, and we noticed that there was an incredibly hot turnaround between one clip and the next, and we knew that those were going to play back to back. And because we had the luxury of time, and the luxury of being able to see that content in enough time to be able to stitch it together, that's something that we did knowing that it would make the call easier. And because of that, by combining two pieces, that buys me more time to figure out where we're going to go next, or what options I can offer to the director to choose from. Because being an AD is really about buying and manipulating and bending time. It is about figuring out how much of a cushion can we build for ourselves so we can give everyone else in that truck as much time as they can to do their job. And it's about the luxury of time. So we're trying to figure out where are the shortest turnarounds that we can solve our way out of in advance.
Right on. Perfect. Nick, what about you? What's a production challenge that you're solving in pre-production?
I don't often get the luxury, but being able to speak to post-production teams in order to make sure that we're all working within a similar level standard, especially when, as Victor mentioned, when we're working with kind of a very like diverse crowd of crew. You have people from film backgrounds, from broadcast backgrounds, maybe from, IT or freelancers, not everybody might be on the same page as far as like, okay, this is like how we're going to mix our audio. Some people, will split out channels in order for an A1 to mix it after the fact. Sometimes that's how footage rolls in from the field. Others might, just totally send us nuclear levels, full scale. And when you're rolling those clips in live, you're really chasing your tail a lot. And so it's a luxury, but to be able to talk to post teams and set standards for what we're going to work at is always really helpful.
Yeah, that's so critical, right? Because I mean, if you're working an event where there's tons of video roll-ins, and you have a half dozen teams that are out filming, creating content to bring back to you, everyone might have different levels. So making sure that everyone's hitting that same point is definitely going to create a better experience for everyone, right? Vic, what about you?
I think the biggest thing for me from a technical standpoint is taking what you think is the show and the workflow and putting that idea to paper. Because oftentimes, even if it's just a crew of 2 people or a crew of 20 people, having a technical diagram and hammering out the workflow, and it's easy to tell someone, I'm going to wire a couple cameras over there, I'm going to put a monitor over there, and people can guess, oh, what do we need for that? What's the cable run? But having a technical diagram you can just hand to people, it kind of mitigates that micromanagement that you have to do with some people, where okay, I've laid it out as clearly as possible. And like you said, when you have the shows that you have 3 days to prep or 2 days to prep, getting that diagram and working that out in your head and on paper early on sort of helps everyone down the line. And it sort of goes back to like production and directing, where you hammer out the run of show, you go through the schedule, you find those pain points and you address them. And it's the same could be said for just putting out your workflow and your diagram on a map and just routing it and working from there.
Right on. Yeah, doing that technical diagram is kind of like just doing all the micromanagement up front.
Yeah.
And then letting everyone do their job.
Yeah, exactly.
That's great. Cool. So moving into production, right? You've had all of the time that you need to, in pre-production, you're feeling good about your show. Nick, what's the first thing that you're doing when you arrive on set for a stream?
The first thing I'm probably going to work on setting up intercom first before anything else, because people need to be able to talk, departments need to talk to each other, especially if you're dealing with wireless intercom or if you're dealing with fiber runs. That's going to take a while. So first thing we're going to do is we're probably going to get our long runs out. We're going to get our fiber from point to point while the cameras are all getting set up and whatnot. But getting intercom up over everything else helps us immediately. Sometimes we'll start off with radios, which is great, but having comms up, it helps everyone get comfortable with their intercom, helps me fax those comms out and give everybody what they need on their panels or on their belt packs, and allows us to field those requests as early as possible so that we're not fielding them after rehearsal.
That's interesting. So you're like prioritizing internal crew communication first, because I mean, really, you're all going to have to work as a unit to get this thing done anyway. So it doesn't make sense for you to look at stuff down the line.
And it helps us with faxing everything else too,
Yeah, for sure. Liz, what about you? What's the first thing you're doing when you get to set?
I'm talking to Nick, making sure that I can hear him on the comms. But it's comms and it's screens, at least for AD, for front bench, really for the truck. If those things are operable in advance of the rehearsal, then the show is going to be better because we've already felt out what the exact show time scenario is going to be. So I'm looking at my screens, deciding curating where each feed is going to be, even if I'm naturally looking for something that is in a screen that's not there, I'll take the time to actually swap it and make sure that I'm not swimming upstream against my own self, in terms of when I look over here, I need to see this, so we're not thinking about it. But that said, trucks and teams that prioritize taking the time to line up all of those things, making sure that the clocks are where they need to be, easy to see, and very natural, is the difference between trucks I've seen run extremely efficiently and trucks that I've seen run efficiently enough. And we're gonna go for the high bar, but it's worth all of the time.
Yeah, that's super smart. And again, it gets back to that crew communication, right? Like everybody needs to be on the same page. Everyone needs to get the information that they need at the critical time that they need it, right? So getting all that stuff done up front is definitely the best way to do it. Vic, what about you?
The first thing I go for is internet and power. So basically, if I'm walking onto a site or a project, I'm looking for the individual or the company or the vendor who told me there'd be power and there'd be internet. I'm then looking for those cables, and then I'm usually calling a bunch of people, and then Nick's like, where can I plug in the comm? And I go, I don't know. But what happens a lot is, as much planning as you can do, oftentimes you'll ask vendors, all right, I need a primary and a backup, power and internet. And then you'll get on site and you'll see your two cables and they're running into the same outlet in the wall. So then you kind of have to go down the rabbit hole of figuring all that stuff out. But for me, those are the primary things, because those are your lifeblood. If they say you're getting 500 megs up and you get on site and you're barely kissing 10, then you have to start raising flags when you're setting up and before you're rehearsing. And before you have your client asking, can I see a test stream? And you got to go, well, wait a second, it's not what we wanted. Those sort of things will dictate how the rest of your day will go. It could go swimmingly and you have everything you need, or they don't. And you have to kind of just let your crew do their thing, and then you have to put out fires. But those are probably the two biggest ones for me.
Yeah, right on. So you have internet, you have power, you can talk to each other, you can see each other, and then at that point, you feel pretty confident that the show's going to go right. Once the show starts, Liz, what are you doing when it's go time?
So I'm actually counting down every single thing that's playing down to the second, and even then some it feels like sometimes. So if anything is live in the last 30 seconds, 20 seconds, 10 seconds out, we're counting down to every operator and talent with a IFB, so everyone knows where we are and how much time there's left until we're going live again. Simultaneously, because that's not enough, we are then determining where we're going next, and I'm preparing at least 3 options for the director, who will then somewhere, when we're in a good multitasking breaking point, say, where am I going next? And it's like, whose line is it anyway? There's this game where they get a prompt and then the comedian has to give an answer. And if that answer isn't good enough, we're going to buzz it and they're going to have to give another answer until it's right. So usually I'm preparing at least 3 contingency plans so we can go through each of them without thinking twice. From there, we're also checking off what we've played already and maintaining consistency. If we've played something back, we can't play something back too similar right after it, because it would potentially be physically impossible for a host who might have been somewhere to magically appear somewhere else. So we're also keeping in mind the integrity of everything, especially if we are doing a live or live on a delay show. We want to make sure that the magic isn't lost. So those 3 simultaneous things are where I'm prioritizing focus.
Right on. Nick, presumably when the show starts, you're just writing the levels and fixing everything that's been broken all day long. And
I'm listening to Liz.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm listening to Liz and whoever is directing, and they are my guiding light as to where we're going next, because without them, I'm just chasing faders.
Yeah.
And then during that time, we're also, we're listening to feeds that might be coming up online, communicating with whoever is handling those feeds. We're listening to any playback roll-ins, pre-fade, that sort of thing, managing talent IFBs, and continually trying to make sure that everyone's audio is comfortable for them.
Yeah, perfect. Vic, I mean, I think other than listening to Liz, which we're all doing at this point.
Whether you like it or not.
That's right. What are you doing when the show starts?
Yeah, well, first I take a big deep breath, and then if I'm streaming, if I'm handling the encoding, what me and maybe a colleague of mine will be doing is we'll be going through, because most of the projects I work on have multiple outbounds, 10 to 30 different destinations. So when the stream and whenever we're in a holding slate or right before we go live, we're checking all the live posts on your Facebook and your YouTube, seeing that they're all seeing stable connection, they're seeing our slate or whatever our opening image is. And then just crossing your fingers and going from there. From a technical producing standpoint, what I'm usually doing is I'm checking in with all my department heads. I'm checking in with my encoding guys. I'm checking in with any of the technical leads on the graphics or playback, or is it replay and recording. making sure everyone's good, everyone has what they need, and then I can just sit and be a producer.
Right on. Yeah, you're kind of the audience stand-in at some point, right? Like you're the first person to see it hit all of those platforms.
Yeah, and what happens a lot is people will kind of say, are we streaming, are we live? And we say, yeah, we're good. And everyone thinks it's kind of like a set it and forget it. Like, oh, it's streaming, it's happening, I don't need to pay attention to it. So that's where a lot of my work and the encoding engineers come in, because we, as Nick said, we have to be the audience. We have to be fine combing that broadcast, and if there's sync issues, if there's a hit, if there's a weird cut, if we're seeing some sort of weird problem that the rest of the crew is not paying attention because they are putting the show on, we have to kind of be that last QC layer and then just kind of rolling back any issues to production.
Are you in the chat on those platforms? Like when the audience starts watching and they're like, audio sounds weird, are you the guy that's like?
Sometimes those chats will be my worst nightmare, because there will be someone on a phone in a coffee shop with barely any Wi-Fi, and they'll type out of sync, out of sync, out of sync, and then that's the first thing that clients will see. That's the first thing they'll complain. You kind of have to reassure them. My favorite are the chat angels who just come in and say, sync's fine for me, looks great here, video's smooth, and I'm just like, thank you guys.
That's right. That's just your alternate account.
Or that,
on another computer, like, I don't know what the problem is, it looks great to me. Right on.
Yeah.
What are you bringing to set that's like your security blanket? What's the thing that you know is going to get you out of a jam that you're going to experience? Vic, why don't we start with you?
For me, it's my crew. As kind of cheesy as that sounds, if I am around individuals that I can trust and I've worked with before, which is not often the case, my first calls will sometimes not be booked, and it's kind of just the nature of the game. Not everyone, always fluctuates. But if I can have my first calls and the crew that I trust, then the micromanaging and the stress and the unknowns kind of go away, because if there's an issue with audio, Nick's going to take care of it, and I don't have to worry about it. And then the second thing for me is just redundant workflows. If you're bringing encoders, a primary and a backup, bring a third tertiary if it's a crazy event and nothing can't go down, and power backups, and kind of look at all those pain points in your diagrams and be like, what happens if that goes down? What do I do in that situation?
Yeah, that was a cheesy answer, but I appreciate it. But it was the answer. Nick, what about you? What's your security blanket on set?
Well, my canned response for this was as many Terran X AVs as I can bring. But really, it's a box full of audio turnarounds that holds a Q box, a bunch of comms turnarounds, 4-wire breakouts and whatnot. And I have a bag of Sharpies and a multi-tool that pretty much get me out of any trouble.
Yeah, that sounds right. If you'll excuse my language, we have a box called the oh shit box, which is what you dive into when someone's like, oh shit, the audio isn't working. And you're like, well, I got a cable in here somewhere that's going to do what it needs to do. So I feel that. Liz, what about you? What's your security blanket?
I have a list of assets that is similarly named. We'll call it back pocket videos of what if something were to happen, as it does in live so often, talent doesn't come, something just goes awry. We need to know exactly what we can pull that will have the least amount of residual effect on the rest of the show and keep as much intact as possible, so we can get the train back on the track again after we solve for that section of time. So emergency videos that can be played are always a good thing, and also lots of stopwatches for when we're calling times within times. 2 is usually enough, but sometimes not.
Right on. Cool. So the event is closed, it's over, it's been successful beyond your wildest dreams, and now we're after the show. How do you guys measure the success of a show? Nick, let's start with you. What does success look like after a show?
Let's see, that's a tough one. I would say, I think I would say as a company we look at engagement a lot, but from my standpoint, I look at how did we handle any problems that arose, and how much better can we do that the next time? How can we be better prepared? how did we, how did our planning phase go? How was our communication? How can we improve that? A great show is where everyone communicated very well and we effectively put out any fires with minimal impact for the client.
Right on. Perfect. Vic, what about you? What does a successful live stream look like?
For me, coming from Sweet Spot, and we kind of tout ourselves as a client services company, it's the clients and projects who come back to you and they want to do another stream that I kind of go, oh, well, they must have had a great time in the last one. Because sometimes you'll get projects where they're a brand or what have you is streaming for the first time, and everything goes off without a hitch technically, the content's there, but maybe they just didn't reach the numbers that they wanted, and then they kind of go cold and they don't call you back for another broadcast. But it's the clients that like immediately after the stream are like, that was awesome, let's do that again. That sort of for me is the biggest indicator that like we pulled off a successful stream and it was successful for our client.
Right.
That's the big one, yeah.
Yeah, awesome. Liz, what about you?
So surface level, if we hit all of our deliverables, sponsor deliverables, et cetera, things we were obligated to play back, that's obviously first and foremost easily quantifiable. No dead air, always. Game, the base level of 0 is always a place that we focus and figure out where exactly and how did we make all of that happen and reduce the things that happened in live that might have tried to thwart that. So we evaluate what that was and how can we repeat that again in the times we did it successfully. And on top of that, it's did we put our best live spontaneous content out? Did we leave nothing on the cutting room floor that came in that was good and high quality? And just making sure that the decisions that we made in real time were the right ones, both from an editorial perspective and also from just a quality of content perspective. And finally, is the truck still talking to each other? That's always a good sign that communication and preparation went well. That's why we spend so much time doing it in advance. Because the goal being that everybody leaves wanting to come back and do it again with you and each other is a sign that we actually figured out how to efficiently communicate. Because when breakdown happens, that's where we lose the camaraderie, and where you lose camaraderie, you lose calm. And a calm truck is a happy and efficient truck, and that to me is the greatest measure of success.
Cool, right on. That pretty much takes us to, we're pretty close to time, so if y'all have any questions, now's a good time to ask them. We were pretty thorough. Yeah?
I just wanted to speak for Nick. I do have live sports stuff too. For columns is obviously very important for that. Do you have any like wireless solutions that you know of that are like half a second or less? We use the Unity app right now, which basically is like a walkie-talkie on an iPhone basically, and there's some IFB features on our line view units, but just I don't know if you knew of any other wireless solutions. We have a studio and then like the other breakout venues that we shoot in.
So I'll repeat the question. So looking for wireless audio solutions with as little delay as possible.
So we're, LiveX is a Clearcom dealer, so we use Asian IC, which is their smartphone app, and we love it. It ties in either to we have an Eclipse series matrix frame that lives in our master control room in Manhattan that ties right into, or it can tie into little, Clearcom sells little LQ series throwdown boxes that'll spit out audio in and out. We love those. It is all dependent on your cell service, but latency is really good. And we love them for IFBs, especially because of that latency. And they work great for any like ENG teams you have in the field, so they can just go on LTE and run around. Your teams can shoot. They can have comms back to somebody's panel. It's great. Or they can have IFB that's just running.
Cool. Any other questions? Yep, in the back.
For Victor, you mentioned staying on top of all the standards and technical requirements from the social networks. Do you have a process that you go through, or will you stay on top of that rather than chasing?
Yeah,
to
it's
catch up?
it's a mix of just word of mouth and just kind of talking to other colleagues I work with. The biggest one for me is these are large corporations, and so sending them a support ticket to like ask about these certain things, it just goes into a hole, and then it gets back 3 to 5 business days, and it's not even the answer you need. I think it's the biggest luxury is if you know individuals at those organizations. That's the biggest one for me. And the second one is just, doing a lot of QCing and R&Ding and testing. If you know most of your streaming and your clients are on Twitch and YouTube, then, on your off days, or if you're checking out gear or you're just in the shop kicking around stuff, shoot out test broadcasts, try to bring it to the maximum level and see what it kicks back to you, and then just kind of taking that from there. And then you sort of learn organically about what works better on what platforms versus not. And they do put out information. It's sort of just buried in FAQs and developer notes and posts about that. So a lot of information gets circled a lot on video forums and what have you. So those sorts are good outlets as well for just being on top and then just asking around.
So it's just a process of continually trying to break things.
Yeah, no, we break things a lot.
Yeah,
So.
right on. Cool. Any other questions? Yeah.
Labor has a big impact on your overall budget. So can you talk a little bit about pre-planning on crewing? So with limited budget productions, what are you doubling up in certain crewing roles?
Yeah, that's a great question. So talking about where can you find some efficiencies in your labor if you're working with smaller budgets?
From a technical standpoint, I think I can't speak for broadcast, but it feels like a live stream specific problem where, the budget does come into a factor, and you kind of have to look at the project and, see what you can double up on safely and not jeopardize anything. And this goes back to knowing your crew. If you need to have a project and you have a bunch of graphics and needs to switch, do you find a TD that's cool with doing graphics and switching? If so, great. And then the same thing for, if I'm a technical producer, sometimes I'll wear a hat as an EIC on set as well. Or if you're an encoding engineer, are they comfortable with also EICing and streaming as well? It's sort of a little bit of a voodoo magic for me, where it's like I got to look at the crew and know who's comfortable where and kind of try to double up on that.
Yeah, you kind of see roles just merge together where like instead of having a producer and director, you have a producer director, and then you have a technical director / streaming engineer / graphics ops / replay. First time I ever saw Aubrey at a show was at NAB, and she was operating like, I don't know, 5 different machines at the same time. So technically it's possible, I guess. I haven't seen anyone else do it, but yeah, that happens for sure. Any other questions? The last thing that I want you guys to think about, if you're still pondering over any questions, is I think that it's a really important question to ask yourself when you're considering producing a live stream. Does this need to be live? Live streaming is complex. The platforms are changing all the time. And the reason that live streaming is powerful is because it is incredibly engaging, right? Like users comment much more frequently. It's a connection between the audience and the content. That's kind of the reason of being for live streaming. And so if you don't have if that's not part of your vision for the project, then then there may be other options for you. But as you're considering live streaming, especially on social platforms, you need to think about the audience first and think about how they're participating, how they're engaging in the live stream, because that's what's going to create a successful show for you. So I think with that we are wrapped. So thanks very much for our panel. Thanks for joining us, guys.
Thank you.